As I sit here in what is more than a graveyard for smartphone evolution, I look at these phones and reminisce through some of the most interesting devices that the iGyaan journey has been through. HTC was one of the most popular smartphone manufacturers. In fact, it still exists only as a VR headset manufacturer, the HTC Vive. You've probably heard of it. HTC was founded in 1997 and it was basically operated by its founders through and through. It is presently being run by Cher Wang, and having met the lady, I can tell you that she's one of the most interesting ladies in the tech space. And if anyone can bring back HTC to its former glory, it is her. But more importantly, let's talk about HTC as a smartphone company. HTC was a vendor, an original equipment manufacturer from Taipei, and they were manufacturing phones with Windows 2003 Pocket Edition and selling these phones to network partners like O2. And one of the first phones that I ever used from HTC was the O2 XDA. And this phone had a stylus and a 240 pixel screen. And this was a really big deal at that time. This was a really expensive phone at that time. And after that, I used the O2 XDA Mini, which was a smaller, more portable version of this device. And then the first HTC branded Windows phone that I used was the HTC Touch. And I ended up returning that phone in less than a week because the user interface was so slow and laggy that it didn't seem like a good phone to own. But HTC has been pivotal in the success of Android. One of the first phones for Android was made by HTC. And while they were experimenting with trackballs and home buttons, HTC design and HTC's Sense UI has been one of the most interesting aspects of Android phone evolution over the years. Now, HTC was important to us because not only did HTC lay down the ground rules for some of the most interesting devices, but HTC was also important to iGyaan's journey because some of the initial leaks and things that made iGyaan popular were for HTC phones, to the point where HTC reached out to us and wanted us to review their devices. Having met some of the people from HTC, I can tell you that they are one of the most interesting people. And whether it was the team in Delhi or in Singapore, which was their sort of Asia headquarters, or whether it was the people at the headquarters in Taipei, these people were not only tech focused, but they also cared about their products in a way that I've not seen any other company do. And they also cared a lot more about the end user and their experience. While most of these people no longer work at HTC, I did spend a little bit of time with Cher Wang many years ago, and she was a very interesting lady and had a lot of knowledge about the space she is in. And now she is the CEO of HTC. Now, it's been many years since HTC has made a smartphone, but there are rumors that the company is going to bring back their smartphone unit. In fact, it was bailed out by Google for $1.1 billion back in 2018 when they acquired a large chunk of it, and they made some Pixel phones out of that. HTC had some technology way back in the day when nobody was even talking about it. In fact, I think one of the reasons that HTC didn't succeed was they brought out technology before people were ready for it. Some of the designs and the build quality of HTC phones are still one of the most popular. And if you were born in the end of 80s or the early 90s, you've probably grown up looking at HTC phones. HTC really put themselves on the map with the launch of the HTC One range of phones. The HTC One M7 was one of their first phones and one of the most popular devices from HTC, and which also sort of cemented them as a leading smartphone manufacturer. This is also the time when they just acquired Beats Audio and they started putting Beats Audio into their smartphones, which meant that these two forward-firing speakers had really impressive sound. In fact, even today, when you power this phone on, you can hear the loudness of the speakers and they still work great. This phone does work well even today, and including the display, the battery, everything on this phone works as if it was back in 2013. HTC, before they got to this point, had some interesting phones. The HD2, which remains infamous as one of the most versatile phones to run many operating systems. You could basically flash any OS onto it, and the developer community around it was one of the largest. Some people still own that phone today and have experimented with the latest operating systems and have also succeeded. This goes to show the build quality and design and overall performance capability of HTC phones. Now, you would think that HTC would have continued because of their quality, but what they lost out on was the influx of many other companies. The Xiaomis, the OnePluses of the world, they took over the large chunk of the buying audience for HTC phones, as they did with many other brands like BlackBerry and Motorola, and HTC was one of those fallen heroes that went down fighting. The last phone that HTC ever released was the HTC U11, at least in India, and while this phone was really impressively built and designed, it was way too expensive for the kind of features it offered, and they didn't have it available in time for the Indian market. So not a lot of people paid attention to this phone, and the company was eventually sort of stopped, and it never sort of made it through. HTC also experimented with many tablets at that time, and they also came out with the Nexus 9 tablet, which was again one of the best built Nexus tablets. And we owned one for a while, and it lasted us a while, but then the display sort of fell through. But HTC's journey has been really interesting. The HTC One M8, for example, was one of the first phones to feature a dual camera. The secondary camera was designed to do what today's portrait shots do. It was a depth mapping camera, and not only did it give you portrait shots, it also had the ability to erase objects from your photographs. So what you see with Magic Eraser, you had that in the HTC One M8 back in 2014. HTC was way ahead of time for this technology because people had barely just started using smartphone cameras, and giving so many features to people sort of didn't get people excited, because just using phones with cameras was getting exciting at this time. Getting all of these additional features was way ahead of its time. HTC also continued to experiment with their Sense UI, something that did develop over time. One of the cleanest, most well-performing user interfaces of all time, and one with some of the best and most interesting widgets that still remain unmatched till date. The clock weather widget, for example, you probably know of this. A lot of people tried to make a replica of that and always failed, because the original clock widget was so smooth and it looked so good on HTC devices that entire skins were made to replace on other phones, including Samsung devices, just so that you could get the clock widget on those phones. HTC continued to experiment with their build quality because they wanted to ensure that their flagship phones at least had some of the best builds. The next two generations of HTC phones continued along this journey up until the HTC 10, which was basically the One M10, but it was called the HTC 10, which was basically the pinnacle of HTC's design process. This was made from a single billet of aluminium with chamfered edges, one of the most beautiful smartphone designs that I have seen over the years. And this phone was at the height of HTC's success. However, this phone was taking a beating from Xiaomi and OnePlus and all of these other smartphone manufacturers that were offering similar specifications in a less well-built device for a fraction of the price that this phone was selling at. At this time, you'll also notice that the secondary camera is gone from the back, is because nobody really understood what the depth camera was able to do. And at that time, we also didn't have any photo sharing apps. And while HTC built their own Blink feed, it never really sort of got popular and people never really got used to it. So they stopped building the depth camera into their phones because people were not basically using that feature. HTC was also one of the first companies to experiment with attachable power banks. We've talked about this in the past. This is the HTC One X Max. This was a phablet back in the day when phablets were not popular. And again, like the One M7, it did have a removable back plate. So you could basically remove this whole metal plate from the back, and you could access the SIM card and the micro SD card in the back of the phone. But more importantly, this did have what HTC called boom sound, which was their forward-firing speakers. And boy, did it sound good on this phone. One of the largest speakers that you'll find on any smartphone device. This was a truly impressive phone. It still is a truly impressive phone. It still works and runs. And I installed CyanogenMod on this, and it continues to work well. In fact, they built this cover, which was an external battery pack. I've shown this off in the past as well. So you simply slap this on the phone and you get additional battery. And while the battery in this cover has failed, the phone continues to perform almost as well as it did on the first day as far as battery life is concerned. That being said, HTC was not flawless. They had some of the most interesting failures of smartphones as well. Some of their Desire phones completely failed. They did have some of these plastic polycarbonate devices that also didn't make it through. And they also had some Desire phones, which were really expensive for what they were offering as far as specifications were concerned, up in the 30,000-40,000 price bracket for what were basically mid-range specifications. HTC tried to pull it off, especially in India when they didn't have any manufacturing here. They were importing and paying heavy customs duties and taxes to make these phones available, and the prices varied quite a lot. You would often see a 10,000-20,000 premium on HTC phones, and unlike Apple, they were not able to pull it off as far as their prices were concerned. HTC was also innovating with respect to some of the other devices that you could buy, smartwatches, some additional accessories, and including the HTC One Mini. This was a little phone that you could pair with your main phone, and this would work as a feature phone instead of a smartphone. So you can make calls and you can end calls, and this also still works. The display stopped working, but I can still make and receive calls on this. The earpiece works, the buttons work, everything works. It's just a very interesting concept. Why has nobody else thought of this? Well, because nobody understood this device at the time, and it was way ahead of its time even then. I think something like this would do really well today. If you want to just make calls, this is the phone that you want to have. If you're tired of looking at your screen all day, this is the device that you want to have. Unfortunately, no one makes it today. Either way, if HTC is working on a brand new device, we will be excited to see that. I hope that HTC does come back and bring some interesting phones. I can tell you, as far as design and innovation goes, HTC is one of the strongest companies, and the fact that HTC is not shut down its doors means that there might be something in store for us, whether it is in the form of the Meta phone or an Android phone comeback. We would be happy to sort of check out their devices and possibly own some of them. We hope that HTC can make a comeback, and if you've used any of these HTC phones or any other HTC phones over the years, let us know what model it was and what year you bought it. And while HTC does not exist today, the memory of their build quality remains as far as the HTC 10 is concerned, and I've yet to see a phone that is as well built as this solid chunk of metal. That's it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed us reminiscing through the journey of HTC, let us know in the comment section below. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one.